Mark stands in his driveway in 1996, holding the keys to his first home. He is 24 years old, a little anxious, but mostly proud. His mortgage payment feels heavy, but he knows he is building a foundation. Fast forward to today. Chloe is also 24. She sits in a rented apartment, tapping her phone screen to buy $50 in fractional shares while her budgeting app alerts her about a side hustle payment. At first glance, Chloe looks like the smarter, more sophisticated investor. She has access to tools Mark could never have imagined. But the real math tells a different story. While Chloe is optimizing every dollar, she is fighting an invisible financial headwind that Mark never had to face. And decades later, one of these paths leads to quiet, compounding wealth, while the other feels like running on a treadmill that never stops. Let's keep this fair. Mark and Chloe both represent the typical young adult of their generation. They both work full-time jobs, they both want financial security, and they both try to make smart decisions with their paychecks. But they are playing the game on two entirely different boards. In 1996, Mark earns a median salary of around $35,000 a year. The median home price in his neighborhood is roughly $100,000. That means the cost of a house is slightly less than 3 times his annual income. He saves up a modest down payment, signs a stack of papers, and suddenly he is a homeowner. Chloe's world looks drastically different. She earns a median starting salary of around $55,000. But the median home price in her area has skyrocketed to over $400,000. The house is now nearly 8 times her annual income. Mark's biggest financial concern is fixing the leaky roof on his new house. Chloe's biggest financial concern is simply keeping her head above water. Because of this massive gap, their money habits naturally diverge. Mark follows the traditional playbook: buy a house, pay the mortgage, and let the 401k quietly do its job in the background. Chloe cannot afford the traditional playbook, so she adapts. She turns to micro-investing apps. She tracks her budget obsessively on her phone. She picks up freelance work on the weekends. On paper, Chloe is working much harder at her finances than Mark ever did. But effort alone does not equal wealth. Let's check the scoreboard at age 25. Mark has been in his house for a year. His mortgage payment is locked in at a fixed rate. It takes up a significant chunk of his monthly take-home pay. And honestly, he feels a little broke. He does not have much cash left over for going out, and his savings account is basically empty after paying for a new water heater. If you looked at Mark's bank account, he does not look wealthy. But every single month, a small portion of his mortgage payment goes toward the principal. He is quietly buying a piece of his house. Now look at Chloe at age 25. Chloe feels financially engaged. She has an app on her phone that rounds up her purchases and invests the spare change into an S&P 500 index fund. She participates in loud budgeting on social media, actively tracking her spending and sharing her progress with friends. She knows what an expense ratio is, and she is careful to avoid high-interest credit card debt. Chloe's rent is expensive, taking up nearly 40% of her income, but she feels like she is making smart moves with whatever is left. She has $3,000 saved in a high-yield savings account and another $2,000 invested in fractional shares. If you compare their liquid cash, Chloe is actually winning. She has $5,000 she can access immediately. Mark has almost nothing in the bank. At this exact moment, Chloe looks like the clear winner. She is agile, she is invested in the market, and she is highly educated about personal finance. Mark just looks like a guy struggling to pay his mortgage. But this early advantage is an illusion, because while Chloe is building a small pile of cash, there is a massive weight tied to her ankle that Mark never had to carry. That weight is student loans. When Mark went to a state college in the early 90s, he worked part-time during the summer and managed to graduate with almost zero debt. His tuition was low enough that a minimum wage job could actually cover a significant portion of it. Once he got his first real job, his paycheck belonged to him. When Chloe graduated, she carried the generational average of $21,670 in student loan debt. This is the turning point where the math fundamentally changes. Chloe is making smart choices. She is investing. She is budgeting. But every month, a large chunk of her income is automatically siphoned away to service her student debt. She is paying interest on an education just to access the job market. Mark's money was going into a house. an asset that historically appreciates in value. Chloe's money is going into a loan, a liability that only drains her cash flow. This debt acts as an anchor. It forces Chloe to delay major life milestones. Research shows that over 80% of Gen Z borrowers have put off major investments, like buying a home or starting a business, specifically because of their student loans. So while Mark was building equity in his 20s, Chloe is just trying to get back to zero. She is running a race where her starting line is $20,000 behind Mark's. And that is before we even talk about the biggest trap of all. The biggest trap for Gen Z is not avocado toast or expensive coffee. It is the housing market. When Mark bought his house in 1996, the median home price was roughly double the average salary. Today, that ratio has exploded. For Chloe, the median home price is more than 5 times the median household income. In many major cities, it is closer to 8 or 10 times. Because Chloe cannot afford to buy a house, she has to rent, and renting comes with a massive hidden cost, the opportunity cost of lost equity. Every month, Mark wrote a check to his bank. Part of that check paid for interest, which was an expense, but the other part paid down his principal. He was essentially forcing himself to save money inside the walls of his house. Every month, Chloe writes a check to her landlord. None of that money comes back to her. It buys her a place to sleep, but it builds zero wealth. This creates a brutal compounding effect over time. Let's look at the hidden math. After 5 years, Mark has paid down a chunk of his mortgage, but more importantly, his house has appreciated in value. Without doing any extra work, his net worth has grown by tens of thousands of dollars, simply because he owned an asset in a rising market. Chloe, on the other hand, has spent 5 years paying rent. Her rent has likely increased every year, squeezing her budget tighter. She has diligently saved money in her high-yield savings account, and her fractional shares have grown. But her investment gains are fighting a losing battle against the rising cost of housing. The real cost of being priced out of the housing market is not just the rent you pay today. It is the wealth you are blocked from building tomorrow. Chloe's money habits have to be aggressive and creative, not because she wants to be a finance guru, but because she is trying to outsave an economic environment that is actively working against her. Let's jump forward and check the scoreboard when they both reach age 40. Mark has now owned his home for 16 years. The mortgage balance is shrinking, and the value of the property has likely doubled or even tripled. His net worth is firmly anchored in real estate. On top of that, Mark has been quietly contributing to his 401k. Because he started early and let the market do the heavy lifting, his retirement account has snowballed into a significant 6-figure sum. Mark might not feel rich on a daily basis, but on paper, his wealth is solid and growing. Now look at Chloe at age 40. Chloe has hustled for 16 years. She has managed to pay off her student loans, which is a massive relief. She has consistently invested in the market through her apps, and she has built a strong emergency fund. But because she spent her 20s and 30s paying off debt and covering high rent, she missed out on a decade and a half of real estate appreciation. If she finally decides to buy a house at 40, she is entering the market much later than Mark did, which means she will be paying a mortgage well into her retirement years. When you compare their net worth at age 40, the gap is staggering. Mark's wealth was built largely by the system. He bought an affordable asset early, and time did the rest. Chloe's wealth was built entirely by her own sweat. She had to actively hustle, budget, and invest just to stay in the game. The scoreboard shows Mark winning, but it is not because he was a financial genius. It is because he was playing on a board that allowed him to win. I would be lying if I said Mark's path was perfect and Chloe's path was doomed. Mark's generation is currently facing a massive squeeze. Many Gen Xers are caught between paying for their children's college and supporting their aging parents. They also carry the highest average personal debt of any generation, largely driven by credit cards and auto loans. The traditional playbook worked for buying a house, but it did not teach them how to handle modern consumer debt. This is where Chloe's generation actually has a massive advantage. Gen Z is arguably the most financially literate generation in history at their age. Because they grew up watching the 2008 financial crisis and the student loan disaster, they are highly skeptical of toxic debt. They prioritize emergency funds. They are comfortable talking about money openly, breaking the taboo that kept previous generations in the dark. Chloe does not rely on a single paycheck from a single employer. She has diversified her income with side hustles. She understands the stock market better at 24 than Mark did at 40. If the economy shifts, Chloe is agile. She can move to a new city, change careers, or scale up her freelance work. Mark is tied to a 30-year mortgage and a traditional career path. Chloe's money habits might look chaotic or overly digital to older generations, but they are highly adapted to the modern world. She is building a different kind of wealth, one based on flexibility, multiple income streams, and deep financial awareness. The mistake we make is judging one generation by the rules of another. When older generations look at Gen Z and wonder why they are not buying houses or settling into 30-year careers, they are looking at the wrong scoreboard. Gen Z is not failing the old game. They are surviving a new one. The smartest financial decision is not blindly copying what worked in 1996. The smartest financial decision is recognizing the economic environment you are actually standing in and building a strategy that fits. If the housing market is closed, you build wealth in the stock market. If a single salary is not enough, you build multiple income streams. The rules of money change. The environment changes. The only question you need to ask yourself is this: are you playing the game that exists today or the game that ended 20 years